Well, I will tell you that I do a number of panels. One of my absolute favorite venues for conducting a panel is here at TBS. The reason is everything you do is so top-notch. The party, the technology, the quality of the program, and being able to be here in this beautiful venue and to interview and talk to design icons in front of an audience is a real honor. And I thought that tonight, listening to the poetic answers that the panelists provided, the way that they talked about the projects and about the place, it was poetic. And it inspired me, and I could tell by the number of questions after from the audience that it inspired the audience as well. Let's start with you, Ben.
All right. My name is Ben Langford. Proud to be representing Ground Studio here tonight. Ground Studio was founded by Bernard Traynor, who did an apprenticeship or began his apprenticeship in horticulture 40 years ago in Australia, and then subsequently had a course of study in England under some renowned garden designers, and then 30 years ago came here to the U.S. and founded the firm. We have 24 people in the studio currently, 5 partners, myself, Bernard, Johnson, David, and Chris, and have 3 regional offices in Napa, Monterey, and Santa Barbara.
Yeah. Jonathan?
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Jonathan Feldman. I started my studio in the basement of my house in San Francisco 25 years ago. I wasn't licensed as an architect, so last year we celebrated what was our 20th anniversary since we were official and out of the basement.
Congratulations.
We are now close to 40 people, still in San Francisco, although out of my family's way, and in our own space in Russian Hill. I now have 3 partners and a staff of close to 40. We historically have done a lot of custom residential work. Now excited, that's still the anchor of what we do, but we have been expanding into some sustainable communities and hospitality work as well.
I'm Robin DeLonay, and again, I'm excited to be here too. This is my first time on my way, so go easy on me.
I don't know.
Over there. Anyway, I work for Kolbe Windows and Doors. Kolbe Windows and Doors has been around since 1946, where 2 brothers started our firm with a belief that they didn't want to be the biggest, they just wanted to be the best. I have been there since 1978 and have done almost every job there. I am currently in charge of our Vista Luxe AL area, which is a cradle-to-grave job for me, concept to smooth delivery of our all-aluminum extruded product, which is a Rainier system.
And good evening. My name is Joel Panzer. I had the pleasure of being hired in 1990 to become part of the team that developed what you've seen here on the screen today, the Santa Lucia Preserve, and worked up there for about 15 years. So we created the residential community, the golf community, the experience. Thrilled to be part of that. Sat early on in my career on their design review board and have been brought back about 4 years ago to be the chairperson of that design review board. In my spare time, I do regulatory entitlements for a small little planning firm in Salinas, California, Marine Rock Planning Consultants, but delighted to be here this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So we're going to be talking about the preserve. We're going to be talking about how our designers, our architect and landscape architect have responded to the beauty of the landscape with the built environment. But Joel, let's start by getting a little bit of history about Santa Lucia Preserve. How did it come to be? What's the history of the land there?
Richard Beard put it correctly. It was a historic landscape. In 1990, a company called Pacific Union Company out of San Francisco purchased the property from the Oppenheimer family. I believe they were the third owner. So from the 1860s, when it was assembled, and from early U.S. government land patents, there'd only been 3 property owners.
Mm-hmm.
So Pacific Union Company bought it with a vision of preserving the quality of that historic landscape. As you had pointed your drive in, it really is a magical experience. And fast forward from 1990 to 2024, you've got a number of homes up there, but you can see some of the homes, but that arrival experience really, by and large, has not changed very much, due to the quality of the people that have been associated with the property and its development.
And John and Ben, I'm wondering, do you remember your first impression with the first project? What did you think the first time you saw the preserve?
I first came to California after studying in Texas 15 years ago, and my very first project was one with Jonathan, the butterfly house that we'll get to see tonight. And I just kept feeling like this is like a national park that you get to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And just the purity of the preserve, and just kind of feels like untouched California. And just love that about it.
Yeah. What about you, John?
It definitely parallels what everybody else is saying. I mean, it's so large and so magical, and so many different landscapes within the preserve. 20,000 acres. You get the redwood forests and the oak hillsides and the savanna grasslands. When I first was introduced to it, it was the fortunate occurrence of my parents wanted to build a vacation home, and I was just starting my practice. I was still working for another architect and doing a few little jobs on the side, and they wanted to do a vacation home, and they were looking for little cottages on the beach, and then they discovered the preserve. So I came in kind of with them saying, we found this place that I think we want to do something in. And so driving around, not having much experience as an architect, but just, it was just a gift that the first house that I designed was in the preserve. And so it's been kind of magical to think 20, 25 years ago, how our practice has evolved, and how the preserve, which had no houses built at the time, because that was sort of the first wave of building, have paralleled each other. It's just fun to see it grow as I've grown.
And Joel, all of the homes there, they're all bespoke, each with its own design team. Isn't that correct? What are the general rules for?
So it's kind of an interesting experience. You talk about a historic property, and I don't know if you've traveled around and on vacation, you see something, you're like, oh my gosh, if I were to build, I would build that. So the first wave of homes, we've got a historic circa 1925 Grand Hacienda, 20,000 square feet, beautiful building. People would be like, I would like to build one of those. And over time, Feldman Architecture, other firms have come in with different interpretations of California architecture. They brought in various landscape architects. Even on the interiors, there are various design teams to help create their experience within the preserve. So I would say it's evolved over time in terms of the depth and breadth of the architecture, the landscape architecture that you'll see out there now. And we continue to review and approve homes that are an expression of what the owners want to accomplish. Because I think at the end of the day, it's the feeling of the property, but it's also, I wouldn't say it's a lifestyle, but it's certainly a day-to-day experience when people move up there that it's just, I don't know how to characterize it. You might hear a little bit more, but it really is a phenomenal property.
Well, we're very lucky tonight because what we're going to do is we're going to look at some projects, one, a completed project that John and Ben have worked on, and then some other behind the scenes things that are in progress. We're going to set it up like some little case studies about how to respond to different landscapes in the preserve. So if we could, Justin, let's call up our first case study. This is a house that I believe I've written about, John. I know I wrote about Caterpillar.
You were the only one who wrote about our project's first 10 years.
I've been a chronicler and a fan of Feldman architecture for a while. This one is called Butterfly, and we're going to look here at the plan. And I think what's very interesting, you see that you're sort of replicating that. You drive through the trees, and the main house, the guest house, is set up like a fan. And here you can see why this was given the name Butterfly. So John, do you want to tell us about the roof line there?
Sure. Yeah, it is a series of these 3 buildings, each with a butterfly roof. And, it sits on this meadow, but it's really surrounded by hills around it so that all the views are upward. Often you're on a hilltop looking down or horizontally across meadows, but this one you're really kind of at the low point and looking up, and these roofs all kind of cant up. And these were clients who really wanted to feel like they were thrust into nature. And these roof forms allowed all of the walls to really feel like expansive, sort of the opposite of the cozy house that's protecting you. This was the house that just sort of thrust you out and up to the views. And these forms also mimic kind of the lines that you see in the hills as they overlap each other with these sort of V shapes and these patterns.
And, I think your office told me that the clients wanted to feel like they were camping. And this has me reconsidering my stance on camping, which has been a no until now. And here you have that approach. And Ben, I'm wondering, these obviously were existing trees. And so I'm wondering what influence that had on what's to come on your landscape.
Yeah, I think the context obviously is really, really important here. We have this beautiful stand of existing trees. On a lot of sites in the preserve, you don't have that luxury, and some trees have to be removed. But this one was large enough that we were able to site the house without any tree removal, which felt wonderful. And just the way the trees frame your whole experience, there's this compression and expansion that happens as you approach the site.
Please go on.
Also thinking about, there's a lot of work between our firms thinking about the siting of the house. And it's very interesting that you arrive at the back of the house, which sort of created its own set of challenges and opportunities I think we're able to exploit in the way that the landscape moves around and through the house.
Well, we'll talk about that a little more. This, when I looked at this, I was like, it's camping. It's indoor, outdoor. There's a fire. But before we talk more about the house, Robin, I know that the industry, they call these, it's not a window, it's not a door, it's a wide opening, correct? Is that the...
Oh, yeah, it's very large, expansive openings.
Yeah.
It seems to be on almost every project that we're doing today, we have some form of these expansive openings.
Right. The benefit is very obvious. What do you think an architect or designer should consider when thinking about adding a feature like this to the house?
Well, there's a couple of things you have to look for right off the bat, I think. Number one, this is a big opening, so it's going to be affected by your environment. So you have to consider your solar heat gain and how are you going to create a comfortable space within that home? Are there things you're going to have to do to control that solar heat gain? And maybe even beyond the different type of low-A coatings that would use to it. Also, even in the wintertime, that's going to give you an R3 for glass, not like your R26 walls. So it's going to be the coolest spot in the house. So how do you work with that? So there's a lot of things to consider with that. And then probably another big consideration would be water management against, your rainfall against that large space. Where do you do with that water?
Yeah, and I know we're going to see some things about that in a moment. In fact, I believe that's a rain chain, right?
That's the water feature right there. Yeah.
And before we get to that, Ben, I think that you really see the landscape here. And I noticed that, in the background, you see nature, and you chose to relate to that with grasses. Tell me about that decision.
Yeah, so going back to this desire to be feel like you're camping at your house. Often there's this, we call sort of zone 1 around the house that you want to be maybe a little more tidy or manageable. And we just did it out the window and said, let's bring it up close and really
So no zone 1.
No,
Yeah.
zone 1. No, we're straight to zone 2.
So when a design pro says we threw it out the window, then you know it's going to get interesting. And also here, it's interesting, people in these luxury homes, it's out in nature, but yet they're going to want the things like the hot tub, the pool, and we're going to see how you guys dealt with that. But, obviously, there's no such thing as a native hot tub, right? So tell me about how you made that fit in this landscape.
Yeah, so this is right outside the primary bedroom, so there's real easy access. They're close to the bathroom and shower, and when there's something, hot tub covers are notoriously hideous.
Yeah.
So we thought of a concept of putting a custom steel tub in concrete, and then creating a rolling cover that was able to not be something ugly.
I love it. I want to do a book on making the hideous beautiful. I think it would be. And John, here again, this is such a beautiful site, and you really see the roof line there. And I think the thing that's so interesting to me about that, I believe that it's perforated there, correct?
There are perforations in the awning that goes over the doors.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you can see the slats where the roof is sort of cut away to bring filtered light in through parts of the upper roof as well.
Mm-hmm. And what were your considerations with the windows and the siding of this window wall?
Well, a couple things. One is we knew we wanted to maximize the glazing on this facade because, as Ben said, it really was all about this, compression through the forest as you approach, coming to the back of the house, which is mostly closed off, and this expansion out into the view. And so a lot of glass was required, and glass that was operable. These slide fold doors can only get so wide, right? You can't have giant pieces of slide fold glass. And we worked through that. We were going to do a slide fold wall system. And we found the widest dimension we could get each individual panel. And we literally designed the width of the house to accommodate those increments so that we didn't have to. Normally you have a house and you're like, oh, well, we could have 6 doors that are a little skinny or 5 that are a little wider, but then we have to introduce little walls to fill in the difference. So we started with the unit of measurement from the glazing provider. So that was a big thing. And much like was discussed, there was a lot of considerations about heat gain, about thermal performance. And so, we really modeled this and tracked the path of the sun about how far out the roofs would extend, how this secondary awning over the doors would shade them, and then where we could put little cutaways to get just a little bit more warmth and light in through there without sacrificing the thermal performance.
I love how you reverse engineered it because the illusion is complete, right? It completely opens up. Now, this, we're going to get into this ranging. You specifically sent me this photo, and it is a rain chain like no other. So tell me about that and how it works.
Sure. It was interesting because, water collection was a big part of this project, but we do a lot of water collection in a lot of projects. It wasn't really on our client wish list on this project. And we had these 3 butterfly roofs that were all canted. So we pretty much had these 3 funnels collecting water that we had to do something with. And we knew we wanted to do something poetic. We were talking with Ben and Bernard about okay, what can we do with this water and how do we make it into a water feature so that when it rains, it gets activated. And then the clients, we said, you got to grab that water and store it because we live where we live. And, it's just being handed to us in this poetic way. And so a lot of work into how, to extend it way off to make it a little bit more dramatic, and also to keep it from splashing. Rain chains notoriously in windstorms and in bad weather become kind of a nightmare. And there are a lot of people who curse their architects for putting, imposing rain chains on them. So, this wasn't our first rain chain, so we were very careful about how to choreograph all of that in a way that our clients wouldn't hate us afterwards.
That would be a great headline, not my first rain chain. And then, Ben, we're getting a look here at how the spaces are separated. I believe that this is main house, guest house, correct? Mm-hmm. And this is an example of how you connected the separated buildings with landscape. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, the architecture is really unique in that you have openings and connections to the landscape everywhere. Either visual or sort of an invitation to come out and meander through. This is interesting in that this is the sort of the main entry, and with all the grasses swallowing up and the paving sort of slipping and staggering past, it really invites someone to slow down and enjoy the journey. You're also coming in from the back side of the house, so we had the idea that maybe wayfinding to the front door could be a little bit less direct.
Yeah.
And activate these spaces between the building.
I love that. Slowing down through architecture. And this is an interesting, the next few slides, it's an interesting material story. There's a lot of board form concrete. The steps are almost boulder-like, and obviously that's intentional to blend it with the landscape, yes? And then, of course, we have another big, wide opening. Is this room, where is this located in the house, John?
That's just off of the living room and right next to that fire pit that you saw in the earlier image.
And Joel, it's interesting. I learned tonight that there are 6 different habitats. Is that correct? 5 different habitats?
5.
You want to check. Maybe another one happened. But this sort of illustrates the different habitats in the preserve. What are they?
Well, we've got grasslands, oak woodlands, there's redwoods, there's oak savanna, and number 5, Jen and I talked about this. We know there's a 5th, and it's not coming to us.
It'll come to you. Maybe you'll see it. You'll say, oh, that's the one.
Oh, there's number 5.
Yeah. And then this, I love how the grass comes up. It's almost like a wave coming up to the house. This is Nomo grass or something. I mean, what do you call this? I forget.
This is probably a mix of 10 or 12 different species of grass.
Oh, wow.
We took what we found on the site and replicated a seed mix that would sort of bring nature back as close to the house as possible.
And I know you had to restore a meadow here, right?
Yeah. And the whole water story is pretty important in that conversation as well, because with the roofs collecting this water, we ended up having 30,000 gallons.
Oh, wow.
So Joel will appreciate there's a close watch on how much water gets used from the preserve system. And so getting something like this established does take a bit of water, but after that establishment period, all of that rainwater capture really allowed us to bring our irrigation, our offsite irrigation needs close to zero.
And what year was this house completed?
I think we started in 2010. I think 2013.
Right.
I'm glad you know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, of course, it was important there. It became even more important. And then this is sort of the meadow look, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is mostly natives. You can see the grasses with the brown seed heads are natives to South Africa. So we can use a lot of Mediterranean climate plants here. And we just really wanted something that would really activate in the wind.
Mm-hmm. And John, I think this really illustrates the slatted nature.
Yeah. I'd love to just point out, I'm just thinking here, like there's sort of 2 big things happening here. One is the roof trying to be as light as possible in this butterfly wing kind of way, and the way it sort of telescopes and gets thinner and thinner as it gets out to its edge. And then the way the concrete walls anchor and the kind of contrast between this anchoring on the ground plane and floating on the roof plane, and the way the walls we worked closely with Ben and Bernard about where these concrete walls would be and how they would extend out to anchor the house and also draw your eye out when you're inside to the views.
Oh, beautiful. And I love this shot. It's the lantern on the hill. Now, I have to ask you about this. I like to envision you, John, sketching this out, very Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, drawing it on a napkin or something. I assume you made this drawing.
I did draw that, yeah.
Yeah. And tell me, did you visit the site, and how did butterflies come to you when you made this sketch?
I think we long had called it butterflies by the time we made this sketch. This was a refining of the idea. So this wasn't the first sketch on a blank slate.
Well, don't ruin
this house could be anything.
John.
Honestly, it was the client who coined the term. Like, I had these drawings of something like this that wasn't as simple and as pure. Like, we're always trying to draw the partie diagram to make it simpler and more pure. And this really captures what I was saying about the concrete on the ground and the roofs floating up above. But we had a few drawings of something like this, not quite as simple and pure. And the client, David, I remember saying, so it will look like 3 butterflies just landed on the meadow. And
I love it.
That's what we should do.
Yeah.
So that wasn't in my head until the client sort of.
And Suzanne noticed the Mariposa lilies, which was butterfly in Spanish, and that were growing native all over the site. So she was pretty excited about that.
That's right.
Beautiful. All right, now we're going to get some sneak peeks of things that are to come. And this one is called Stone Villa. And I was so interested to learn that this project is inspired by Europe, right? And European travel. So tell me about that.
This was maybe the first pandemic-induced project that we had, where we had a client who said, we usually travel half the year and we can't travel anymore. And we're thinking of building a place where we could go on vacation, a weekend home, a pool house, they really called it, a place to get. They lived in Carmel on the coast, and they wanted to get out of the fog. So 20 minutes away is their pool house. And they kept sending me all these images of the places they love to go in the European hillsides, these old villas that were hundreds of years old. And they said, we want something like this. And I kept thinking, well, what do you mean by something like this? Like, you want us to design a building that looks a couple hundred years old? And they said, yes, we do. And we said, well, we don't really know how to do that. And we've sort of been working our whole career to try to design things that didn't look like they were old when they are new. So it became a conversation of saying, well, what if we really study what makes the character of these hillside villas in Europe so special and timeless and looking like the house that we design maybe will feel like we don't know when it was built, but it's going to stay here a long time. And it has that old world, not trendy kind of textures, materials, and forms. So we really studied simple forms, rough weathering materials, but, attacked it with a bit of a modernist perspective because that's what we know how to do. And I'm pretty excited about the results. Totally not what they were asking and totally not what we were intending to do, but kind of this joint exploration sort of.
That's where the magic happens, right? And I wanted to ask you about that because as Joel was saying, when this development, I don't want to call it development, but when this community began, there was this very historic reference, the hacienda. It was an old hunting lodge, I believe.
20,000 square foot. It was sort of a grand country experience.
Okay.
So hunting lodge would be a fair characterization.
Yeah.
But more in the hacienda style.
And I'm interested to know, Jonathan, so your firm's response has not been necessarily to look at what was there, as Joel said, look at hacienda and say, Your response has been modernism. I wonder, looking at the landscape, tell me about having a modern response. Why is modernism right for here?
It's an interesting question. Because it's better.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Sorry, that was snotty.
Yeah. That's what we're here for.
No.
The truth.
I mean, I really feel like building of our times with, the way people live now, the way we have materials and systems, and we deal with, earthquakes and all of those type of things that we have to solve modern day problems with, I love the idea of buildings that feel like not of this moment, right? That feel timeless, that aren't trendy and will feel dated. But I also feel like, and it's not to say we don't look back and really learn what made historic buildings beautiful, because what architects of the past have achieved with proportion, scale, rhythm, textures, all of that stuff is the textbooks we're studying. Mm-hmm. We just kind of want to do it of this time. And so modernism allowed us to have these glazing systems, these window walls that open up, the blur, like you can't have the indoor-outdoor connections, or it's very, very rare to find them if you look back in time.
Right. They didn't have the technology.
Exactly. And so there's so much about that. Nobody would have designed a house like this where all the parts are exploded and there's no internal connections between them, right? That's a very modern approach to kind of thinking about a house here.
And I wanted to ask you, and again, this is for you, Ben. Again, we have a swimming pool in the mountains. So how did you make that fit in to this landscape?
So this pavilion on the left is the primary bedroom pavilion, mm-hmm. and the original desire being a pool house. Essentially, we knew we wanted that to be one of the main features, and so there's beautiful views down toward the hacienda there in the valley, and then equally as beautiful but quite different views from the main part of the house out, where the light changes on the treed hillside all throughout the day. And so having this reflective feature in the middle to sort of capture and gather all of that from a visual standpoint was really exciting.
And John, do you want to talk a little bit about the materiality, the wood and the stone working together here?
Yeah, so this is a granite from Sonoma that we wanted something very rough. There are super clean lines on this building, super simple forms, but we really wanted the stone to blend in with the colors of the site. All the wood on the exterior is teak, and it's all left to weather naturally, so it's going to silver and get a richness, a patina over time. I remember long conversations with Ben about the paving patterns, about how we could make it more wild, more loose, less precise and clean. And so all of us, in the same with, not the courses of stone, but the wild kind of loose patterns that you are seeing on the walls, to feel in a way. They wanted to look like an old ruin that was, refurbished and updated. And while we didn't necessarily go 100% in to make it look like an old ruin, we did want to capture that feeling of what that feels like, of what the textures feel like.
Right. An old ruin meets modernism. And I wondered too, this is a situation where the buildings are again separated. And why was that the answer here? This building, I think you described it as being pulled apart.
Yeah, no, exactly. For a number of reasons. We've done a lot of projects on sloping hillsides and working around trees, and we've found often a compelling strategy is to pull buildings apart. Usually they're connected with circulation and people don't want to go outside in the rain necessarily. But this being their kind of weekend getaway, there is a long history of people paying more to go to cabins that you have to walk through woods to get to. And so there's something charming, and also something like, if it's raining and miserable weather, well, they can go home, right? They don't have to stay here. But another thing that was really nice was this was a tight site. Like all of the properties there are relatively large, but sometimes the place where you can put the house is very, very constrained. And this is one of those ones where it's kind of a knife edge ridge, slowly stepping down and falling off steeply on both sides.
I think this shows maybe.
Yeah, that helps you see it. But by disconnecting these, we were allowed to put small buildings with a lot of space in between them. And so if we had connected everything, or if we put a simple long rectilinear building or an L-shaped building or something, which would be more common, you would have dominated the center of the site, and then nature would have been around you. And by pulling all of these things apart, nature's on all sides of you. And when you walk from your bedroom to your kitchen, you're outside and you're walking on these beautiful pavers and ground covers that Ben placed there. And you always get these view corridors that would have all been blocked with corridors and more buildings.
I think this, this landscape to me is very quintessential California. And that idea of having these buildings that you travel outside is so California to me. Now, this, you can really see where they're pulled apart here, correct? What are the buildings we're looking at here?
Yeah, and you can see how tight that little area is. Like, that's the only place you could build. And if you connected everything, it just would have been the donut of the house surrounded by the landscape, right?
Right.
So the far left distant building is the garage with kind of these old world garage doors on it. The building in the foreground and to the left is the primary bedroom and then office on the back side. So that's sort of the where their most private areas are. The larger building in the center is the common areas: kitchen, living room, dining room, pantries, and there's a little loft up above that just gets you this real special view that you only see when you get up. And then the far one is the actual real pool house. We call this whole thing a pool house, but that's the cabana that doubles as a pool house rec room, but also has a Murphy bed and can be the guest suite as well.
I love how these European ruins have solar panels on top. that worked out great, right?
I think another aspect of this collection of buildings is that there's this sense of discovery as you come.
That's right.
And there's something around the corner or a little nook where there's some beautiful plants or a place to sit, and the big views are really held back from you because there's a certain opacity with little glimpses through when you come down into the outer court. And really, as you journey through and down into the site is where your breath gets taken away.
Yeah.
And
can I just building on that, the thing I like best about this project is the arrival and the way you kind of get pulled through this little gap between the buildings. And we can only do that if the buildings are separated. And so it is those spaces in between that sort of really elevate the design, I think.
I love it when design pros talk poetically. It makes such great copy. And it's so interesting. And here you sort of see the materiality meets the grain. And this is the front door?
That's the front door.
And then this, I think, we were talking about pool meets landscape, right? So how important was it that this be an infinity pool? And I guess it's infinity on two sides. So how would you describe it?
Yeah, two-sided infinity. It was pretty critical because you can only have a certain amount of drop, and it was a little crazy. So we're really grateful that they went for it, and it just has the way of pulling the landscape even further in and reflecting the sky.
There's also just, you were asking about modernism. Modernists often will have approach when juxtaposing to the beautiful nature of putting the clean line next to the wild undulating hills.
Right.
This shot really captures that for me, of how the crispest part of this project are these edges of the pool. And they're just set up perfectly to the best view where you can really just appreciate the beauty of those hills.
Yeah. That contrast, I've always found, it causes you to see both more clearly, both the man-made and the nature. And then this shot I thought was so beautiful because of the shadow and the pattern, right? Is this, what is it that we're looking at there, John? Is that the entry or?
I'm guessing that's the back of the office, because that's where the wall extends the farthest. But we did this in a number of places where basically the roofs would extend out and give you this shadow pattern, allow the play of light on the stone and on the ground, and get some light and warmth, but kind of keep the sun off of the building itself.
Yeah. Now this one, this is very interesting to me because, as John mentioned, I have written about Feldman architecture several times, and these clients came to Feldman and said, we want something inspired by green and green. And I found that so interesting because that is, I wouldn't think Craftsman when I think of your firm. And your interpretation of it is interesting. We're going to see more about it in a minute. But is this your first site visit to the site as a team, or one of your early ones?
I think this may have been.
I have no idea when that picture was taken.
Yeah.
Sorry, when we pulled the team
Well,
together.
No, we've been there so many times.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we haven't talked about, but we spend so much time on these sites, and it's the nuances of the sites usually that generate the first ideas. And so, this could be any of a dozen trips.
Well, I assume that you go out as a team and you do several site studies, and tell me about what were some of the early inspirations visiting the site?
Do you want to start with this?
Sure. Yeah, to back up one photo, this is sort of at the bottom as you rise up, and it looks a little flat from this angle, but when you get on top, there's a picnic table that I think many people had stopped to have lunch over the years. And it is a stunning view, and you just feel like you're on top of this knoll with the wood, with the redwoods behind you, and just views in all directions. So we knew that we wanted to preserve the specialness of that place, and it became pretty obvious that it was going to be a challenge to site a building in a way that didn't ruin the thing that we actually really loved about it. So that began a lot of really wonderful conversations about how the building engages with the land and how to preserve really the core of the site where you might typically just put a building.
Interesting. Is the picnic table still there?
What?
Is the picnic table still there?
I don't know.
Oh, they should. They should.
No, there's a bunch of construction there right now. That's under construction.
And this shows
There's the
what you're
picnic
talking
table.
about, then,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, I always thought of this as sort of the Sound of Music site. I just picturing
If only we had a picture of you dancing through the hills like that, that would make this complete.
Well, I think go back one. So these redwoods were also just so impressive. You can see the redwood forest goes up the hill, but then these standing dead redwoods are just these really beautiful, intense sculptures out in the landscape. And so the orientation of the house, the main arc of the house actually points in that direction, which is eastward. So you get morning light and just a lot of intimacy with the tree.
I will say this is one of the most beautiful sites we've worked on, and they're all pretty beautiful. So it's hard to say that.
Yeah.
But it was also one of the hardest sites because it was hard to imagine a house that wouldn't ruin the beauty of the site.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. So tell me about the siting and the placement here.
Yeah, honestly, I think Ground Studio was kind of genius in terms of thinking about, like, we didn't want to put the building at the top of the hill in the middle of that meadow where the picnic table was, because it would just overpower it. And that, but then everything around it was sort of too steep, right? You're not allowed to build over 30% grade. And frankly, you got there pretty quickly. Plus it's more expensive to build on slopes, and, and we didn't want to be down, not enjoying the knoll, but I do remember conversations where we were trying to work that fine line about the border of the being close to it, but not dominating it, and Ground Studio came back with, I remember one of the first rounds of sketches where they basically moved the hill. They basically played with the rhythms of the landforms, but said, you're allowed to move dirt around and work, with the ethos of what is there, with the forms of the hillside. So if we were push and pull so that it feels natural, but it's not the way it arrived, then it would make space for the house to go in these other places. So it was a pretty kind of light bulb moment that was totally not in our radar when we were first thinking about it.
Design pros, I have a tip for you. Work with someone who calls you genius. That works every time. So, John, I want to dive into this. Tell me about how this is Craftsman filtered through Feldman.
Yeah. We had a lot of long conversations. This was a client who really knew architecture well. And she said, I've been obsessed with architecture since I was in high school, and I used to read all these books. And she grew up in Pasadena, and green was exposure for her right there. And very specifically, it wasn't just I love green. It was I love the Gamble House and the Bleecker House, and I want you to get to know those buildings specifically. And I looked at them, and I knew about them because they're famous buildings and they're beautiful. But then I got back on the phone and I was like, but how is that? How do you like our work and their work? And how do you envision these, because it's like you said, not an obvious connection, nobody's hiring us to restore old green buildings because that's not the thing we know. And she said, I just have a vision that, if Green and Green were alive today, they would be designing like you guys are designing. And I want you to get to know their work and interpret what they might do today with your sensibilities. And so it was kind of a very uncomfortable ask in terms I didn't know whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. A lot of people ask us to design stuff that don't seem like good ideas, right? And so that's a big part of those early conversations. But she was so knowledgeable and she knew our work so well, and she had a clear idea of how to bridge the gap, even though she didn't have anything specific she wanted us to do. She was like, I want you to figure it out, not I want you to do this. And so that was an exciting challenge. And, we instantly just started talking through, well, would it mean this or would it mean this? This is all before we agreed to do the job or before she decided to hire us. It was just like, let's talk through this to make sure that we're signing up for something that we can handle and pull off.
She gave the right answer, right?
She did.
And so, Ben, for you, landscape-wise, how did you think about, a Craftsman landscape here to respond to this house?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. This was one of, maybe not one of, it was the most pure meadow that I've ever seen in the preserve. So it was all purple needle grass with very little of the European exotic grasses that tend to show up there. So it always kind of felt like a meadow house, and it felt like it needed to remain so. In terms of specific Craftsman landscape, I think the Craftsman was a little bit more about architecture.
Yeah, exactly.
The gardens weren't, quite as cohesive, and so we felt like bringing in the meadow into the spaces again, but really going a little bit different on the accents, the types of grasses we used, and on the backside as you look up the hill, which is south facing, we're planning on big tooth maple trees that will provide a colorful seasonal foil to the darkness of the redwoods. And so trying to bring light in wherever we can and just create beautiful livable spaces.
Yeah. Now, when we go inside the house, there you can see, this is the meadow you were referring to, correct? Or no?
Yes. Yeah. All of this below is really more or less untouched or be repaired.
When you go inside, I saw the Craftsman reference. Once we go inside, I really see it. And it's materials. It's kind of a spin a little bit, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. And I'll say we were working closely with Commune Design, who spends a lot of time restoring the actual green and green houses in Pasadena. So they were a little bit our guide to, they were got us up to speed quickly as we toured those buildings in Pasadena. But really it was thinking we knew we were going to have a lot of wood in the house because, that was the thing about these Craftsman house that was so easy to pull into the modern time without it feeling like a period piece or a museum. The bricks that we use here, the outside of the building, which looks shingled, is actually bricks that are shingle-like. So they're ceramic tiles, ceramic shingles. Because, we started out thinking about shingles, but we're very, we need to fire harden these buildings that are out in the wilds. And so it was really about finding simple, beautiful, handcrafted materials and caring about the details of how everything goes together. We knew before we drew a line that we thought we would have exposed structure and that we would have wood ceilings and a lot of panels, these stained glass that separate the dining room from the living room and provide a little bit of that little craft detail as well. We were looking for opportunities like that throughout.
That screen is one of my favorite details in these images that you provided. I think it's genius. I love it. And some of them are obscured or it's really good. Now, I want to ask you, Robin, back to our earlier point about modernism. Back in the day, a green and greenhouse would not have a big wide opening. They didn't yet know how to do that. They didn't exist. And so I'm wondering about fitting in one of these systems in a more classic house and how people do that and how maybe you would change things to make it more sympathetic with a classic environment.
So we have a lot of opportunities, a lot of projects that we do where people are asking for those larger openings, and maybe they're living in a more traditional neighborhood, and they really want to have that modern feel in their interior space, but they don't want to disturb the neighborhood. So there's things they can do, and really probably would mess up this view, but to add maybe divided lights inside the glass panes to make it look a little bit more like the neighbor's house or something like that on the exterior, but still give it that great big feel or the modern feel on the interior side. Some of the things that he's done even in this one with the stone columns and working those big lights in between that is something that really plays well when you're doing older homes and moving it into the more modern experience,
There's so much to love about this. I love how, because of the big wide openings, you can see the fireplace stands as an element. You can see the inside, the outside. It's really, really beautiful. And this, in the kitchen, I thought I hope that the tile really is going to be green. Because it's very Craftsman, but I love how it extends the view of the window, and it's just one ribbon of green.
I thought you were going to make a green and green joke about this.
I
didn't want to go
it's
there.
obvious.
Sorry for.
It's obvious. I don't joke about architecture.
You're more subtle than that.
Yeah. So again, this is an example of modern Craftsman, California. Tell me a little bit about the kitchen.
We spent a lot of time in the Gamble House kitchen, and there's a feel. It's like the nicest room in the house. There's so much I love that building. And we got to spend a lot of time there kind of studying it and taking notes about why certain things felt a certain way. But there was something very modern feeling about that kitchen when you go into it. And it had a lot of this sensibility. There was color. There was these textures. There was, wood that's allowed to show the knife cut, the butcher block knife cuts and stuff like that, which is kind of how we're doing the island here. I'm super excited about this. But in all honesty, Commune really took the lion's share of the lead on how to pull it off in the kitchen.
Yeah. Well, your firm and Commune have produced one of my all-time favorite houses. So I'm really excited to see this one. So that's going to conclude the case study for tonight. Thank you so much. I want to end before we go to questions. Joel, I just want to ask you, what's ahead? It's been 25 years, right? So what's ahead for San Lucia? what's coming next?
It's interesting. I would say, having been on the property when it was just a cattle ranch to COVID, the dynamic of that community really changed. We had more people that were down there living full time with high-speed internet. They had recently replaced the cables. And the vibrancy, it was also perceived as an open-air vibrant environment. The vibrancy of the community really clicked. And then I would also say, referring to the Stone House as an example, the quality of the indoor-outdoor experience in Central California, and I think probably within the last 5-10 years, the climate's softened, which creates the opportunity for firms like Feldman and other to have these collections of buildings. So it's no longer a single-family residence. It's these little components that comprise a single-family residence. So I think in terms of our design review process, we're seeing more people coming in or more design teams coming in and approaching it as it's been described tonight to create this really interesting experience, to meld nature with the architectural and landscape architectural components that create a sense of intrigue as you arrive at the site, a sense of exploration, and it's done through little elements. And I think that that's probably, from our review process, we're going to see more of that than, I don't want to describe them as conventional homes, but everything under one roof. And the other house, the Green and Green as an example, is another experience where they pulled that apart to create different elements or experiences between buildings. So I think that's the direction the review process is going.
Well, Joel, you have my emails, so keep me posted on the good ones. I'd love to write about more homes there. So I want to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for the design pros tonight? Anyone? Oh, by all means. And you ask good ones, so let's, yeah.
Much for explaining us what's behind. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. This will make me feel so frustrated when I go to the office, back to the office tomorrow to work on my little kitchen and bathroom renovation. I don't know how am I going to do that. But anyway, so what I found very difficult sometimes is dealing with the clients and their idea of design. And sometimes you present something that you feel that is the best solution for that space. And they're like, I don't like glue. And you're like, whoa. But anyway, do you have like a little nice story of dealing with clients, or something that perhaps you couldn't compromise, or something that it really made the difference, you managed to convince them, or, something?
Look, Chance, have you ever had a client question your design?
Nope, they'll just sign off on it.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe you could tell us about something that happened to someone else.
Yeah, I don't have a great anecdote, but I will tell you there has been an evolution and a realization that if you really care about it and you really think the thing that you want to propose is better for them because you understand what they want and you think you can give them that in a way that they're not quite seeing. There was a period in my time, in my evolution, where I realized, it occurred to me, like, I just don't want to give up on that idea yet. And so I'm going to just make my case. And, I grew up in a family where, like, we all argued with each other, and that's the way we showed love for each other. We were just the kind of, debate everything family. And so I had the skills to argue for things. I never had the confidence to do that as an architect, but I do remember a couple times where I was like, if you would just humor me and let me tell you why I think this is better. And I remember the first few times I did it, I don't know whether it was the literal first few times, but I remember early on trying that when clients would pull me aside and say, I am so grateful that you care this much and that you took the time to explain why you think this is important. And then I realized, after that, like, they're paying us a lot of money for our experience and our expertise, and we have to, we owe it to them and we owe it to ourselves to make the case. And we don't win all the battles, and people disagree with what I think is best all the time. But what I do now know is if I care about it, nobody wants me to not mention that I care about it, or that maybe we could think about this a different way. So I just think that's one of the most important things that I've learned, and that I think has made our designs much better and has certainly made me like my job a lot better.
What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I was going to say, it makes me think of how important it is to have a design narrative. In our office, we call it the project story. What is this about? What is sort of the essence of this design? And sort of come to an agreement with the design team and with the client early on that this is going to be the vision, and then that becomes like a filter for decision making, so that errant ideas or things that don't fit within a framework that we've all worked really hard to create, so those things don't come and take over, and we're able to collectively remind ourselves of where this is going and what is most fitting. I think there's also just sort of a lot of editing that goes on, and with materiality from inside to outside. And I think something Jonathan is really good at is a restraint in material palette. So you'll notice there's not 20 textures on the building. It's very edited, and I think that going through that process with a client with that vision in mind makes for really successful projects.
I mean, you really sold me with this. The path is a journey. I was like, yes. Yes, it is. Okay, anyone else? Any other questions? Thank you all so much for coming tonight. And there is?
There are a few back there.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't see you. Please.
And the question, I think, is directed to Joel and Jonathan. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this too. But I sit on a design review board myself, and I'm becoming more and more familiar with the way that people use policies that are driven by Sacramento to influence architects and designers to pull buildings apart and create different buildings, ADUs and JADUs. And I'm curious to know, I was interested to hear you, Joel, explain to us about that being kind of the future of architecture. And I'm curious to know how much of it is driven by climate and how much of it is driven by policy, if you can speak to that.
It's an interesting question. When we first started doing work as a design review board at the Preserve, our reference was the Hacienda, and maybe you had a courtyard experience, had a feature on the opposite side of the courtyard to create an indoor-outdoor feel. And the County of Monterey, within their regulatory framework and zoning, they thought, no, a house is a house, what's inside the four walls. And it took a long time for the county to get past that to allow more flexibility, as you've heard this evening, in terms of designs. I think the Sacramento piece with the ADUs, that's kind of pushed it in another direction where local jurisdictions have to abide by that. As you would know, design review boards also have to follow certain regulations. But I think from our perspective, it was how the architects themselves tried to approach developing in essentially what's a wild landscape. It's not urban lofts that are pretty clean cut and easy to figure out. So our design review board became more flexible, and with the designs coming through, the County of Monterey in this case was more accepting of different approaches to consider how you look at a single family residence. Mm-hmm. So I think that is to the credit of Monterey County bureaucrats is really a good approach that they've taken, and it's really benefited the quality of the experience that you saw again tonight and throughout a number of the properties, a lot of the properties that have been developed at the Preserve.
Maybe one thing to add to that, and hi, Stephen, good to see you. It's a great crowd here. So many talented people. Policy is changing what we can do in terms of that. I do remember, and I'm sure Joel remembers some early conversations on some of our projects when you were in the design review board of where, like in the Butterfly House, the guest house was part of the main house, right? It wasn't a guest house, and it didn't really comply with the guest house requirements. And I can't even remember why, but there was conversations of like, that probably needs to be attached, and we didn't want it attached. And so we'd have conversations, and Joel is always our advisor about what Monterey may or may not allow. And so we drew it with a covered walkway that connects it in case they needed it to do that. And then there was a conversation of, now do we really need to put in the covered walkway? Because the reason for the regulation is they didn't want a subdivision here of all these little separate houses. They wanted a main house. And so nobody was going to care whether there was a covered walkway or not connecting those guest bedrooms. But we have a number of projects where in the old days, we'd have to draw something, and then we were very prepared to build it if the county really cared, and ultimately the county wouldn't care to make it comply. But now, because of the ADU and the junior ADU, you now have these avenues where you can create these detached buildings that before you weren't allowed to. So the change of the regulations has opened doors in a way that we used to have to sweat that and not be sure and be on solid ground whether or not we could do that.
And it was on your plans, don't label it a guest house, just call it bedroom number 5 or bedroom number 4.
Right.
Yeah, there's a subtlety there for
and that's not a kitchen, and that's not a laundry room.
Yeah.
because then you set the tenor of the conversation you're going to have with a regulator by it's the like the little magic piece, but it's labeling. And they eventually came along to think, yeah, you can do a detached bedroom. We don't have to look at it as a guest house, which again allowed a lot of architectural interpretations to the benefit of not only the landscape, but to the benefit of the vision that the owner wanted to pursue, or the flexibility that was given to the architectural landscape teams.
Planning secrets. Stephen, I'm sorry I overlooked you. The light is in my eyes, but I think some folks next to you have questions as well.
Yeah, hello. My question's actually for Robin on the fenestration side. I mean, we have these magnificent properties, there's really no other word for it. Obviously with design challenges, for fenestration, windows and doors. Robin, what's the optimum timeline to get involved with fenestration with an architect or design on a project like this? I mean, frequently I can see it designed and they just hand it to you, and then obviously they'd be more challenging than starting from this very beginning.
With a lot of these designs, really, if they're involving distribution like TBS, who's works with different fenestration products and knows and understands what each can do, the sooner the better they can get involved in that. Some of these footing designs and things like this, and how we can incorporate the different water management systems that are available to be either integrated or separate from the products. That's important for the architects to know early on. That's a great time to get involved. And also, you can start to look at what's possible for size and scope of some of these, what's the design load requirements that are going to be there. And I know you guys, the architects, you figure a lot of that stuff out ahead of time. But when it comes down to what can really be built, what makes sense, what requires steel reinforcements, what can be aluminum, that can really affect the price tag of the project as it moves on. So the sooner you can get involved with a fenestration specialist, the better. And Mamuka and his team work great with that, but they also bring those things to us. And we do have, in-house engineering staff to help make those decisions and provide you the information that can help you. So if you're looking at, we want to go 14 feet, then, this product's problematic at 14 feet, but, at 13.6, it's great. And now that changes the roof line and how everything goes on. Sometimes we look at those things and say, gee, that's funny that window's that small there. Maybe I should make that one bigger.
How dare you?
I know.
It's always good to get another set of eyes on it.
Yeah, and we'd love to help you out with it. And there's some things that we know for a fact that, our product can't handle, and maybe that's something that you need to go to a different fenestration provider for, and we can tell you that right off the bat so you're not beating your head against the wall trying to get our product to work. Or sometimes we can say, yeah, this is a perfect fit, and or we could do this, which might make it even more impressive. Might look at it and say, oh, there's really big panels, those should be motorized. Okay, now you have to think about, where's that motor going to live? Can you go above it? Can you go in a stud pocket? What do you need to do to make it happen? And we love to be involved right off the bat. But that brings up an interesting point. Your sunshade that you have there, you have a display of the resin product, which is a shade that comes down and blocks that sun. So like we talked about very early on the thing, and Mamuka's team has plenty of solutions to do something like that. Talk maybe about insect control. There are some screens for these large openings, but most of those are for screening the opening, not the door. But for some cases, how do you want to use that door? There is a possibility to do some built-in screens that disappear into the frame, maybe only go out for a meter or so it's a pass-through thing. If you're using that doorway as a regular entrance and exit, and you want to leave the door open and just pull the screen behind, there's some possibilities of some things that you can do that maybe architects don't even know about today, right? Yeah. And we're happy to provide some of those options or alternative.
Wonderful. Are we any more questions in the back? I want to thank everyone.
There is one.
There is? I keep missing. I'm so sorry. Please, Will.
You're in the spotlight, Mary.
Yeah, I am.
Working. So, there it is. My name is Mark Tenorio. I'm from DeLonay Construction. Thank you so much for the presentation. That's beautiful stuff that you guys are doing out there. I'm curious from a builder's perspective. I know it takes an amazing team to put these together, but what are you looking for? And maybe this is more specific to Feldman and Ground Studio. What are you looking for in a builder to help bring all of this to fruition? I know that we're an integral part of bringing together jurisdictions and designers and owners, but what's important to you guys that we can help with to bring these things to life?
That's a great question. Yeah. What are you looking for in a builder?
First and foremost is we're just looking for good people with a lot of experience and a lot of skills. I think there's not a specific, we need somebody who's done this exact same thing that we're trying to design here. To me, what we all do, and the builders know this as much as anybody, is really difficult. And there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot at stake, and there are a lot of unpredictable things that can happen. So people who communicate well, people who are team players, builders are always, we're always getting them in our projects early. To the same thing that Robin said about talk to the fenestration expert early. We want our team together early. When we're starting design development, we want to have the builder on the team so that we can be talking to different companies that are manufacturers, suppliers, subcontractors who are helping us flesh out what is best for the design. So, I just think getting good people who are committed to, working together and, helping us find the answers.
Now, I'm not going to wrap it up until I know.
I'm sure there are more people in the shadow.
Question. I see one. Yes.
Can you say it?
Thank you so much for all the insight that you've given thus far. So these are very unique homes in a very special location. And I'm sure there's a lot of sensitivity with these locations that you have to pay attention to, clearly. For a young designer like myself, what would be your input or encouragement to test out the sensitivity with design outside of these sites? How can I, as a young designer, apply the sensitivity to a site that might not even need it, but I want to learn about it. I want to understand how to be sensitive even in a site that doesn't necessarily need it, if that makes sense.
That's for you.
Follow-up question: are you an architect or landscape, or what's your design field? Okay. So you might have a little more to say, but I'll start and say just design in general. It's such an opportunity to test theories and things that you feel might be a good idea. So, if the stakes are low, it's kind of the perfect place to explore something and get that data for what is this going to tell me? How could I apply this at scale? So it sounds like you're already there. I think you should just do it.
You're asking the right question.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, what's special and not typical about what we're showing you today these are big, dramatic, natural sites, right? There's a lot of scale. There's a lot of nature to respond to and to be sensitive about. And that's hard to replicate if you're not doing that on a project. But I think the same sensitivity that's applied here, although it's in a different form, applies to any project on any site, right? If you're in the middle of a city, what's happening right next to you. If you're in the middle of the suburbs, anywhere you're working, it's all about context, and it's all about getting to know the super subtle cues in there and what are different ways that people might respond to these subtle cues. So I think, the skills of we've kind of honed our craft because we've had the privilege of doing all of this on these beautiful sites. But it's the same type of questions we're asking on any site. And, messed up, intense urban sites next to a freeway, it's maybe the opposite problem, but it's the same problem in that context is everything, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing just to throw out there is just exposing yourself. Like when we're working, it's hard to get out there and get inspired and travel and read about projects and visit projects. But the more you can just go out and see good examples and bad examples and sketch, well, how did they solve this problem, and start thinking that way. That's the training that we all have to just keep doing to remind ourselves what else is out there.
If I could add a little bit to that, because I see drawings and, projects from all over the country, not just this great, big, beautiful landscape here, which is cool, but when they're designing homes that are going in Boston, or things that are happening in Chicago or Atlanta or wherever it is, how can you use your fenestration to complement what you have to work with? So windows up high, where it may help bring in all that natural light, but it doesn't allow the sound and stuff to filter in, or it doesn't allow you to see your neighbors or your neighbors to see into you. How do you create all these little buildings, your small opportunities to connect the interior with the exterior? Those are big things that people are after today in their built environment, and just little things. You may not have this great big landscape to work with here, but every site has an advantage, and you have to find that and how you can work that in.
Well, that's beautifully said. Every site has its advantage. Thank you so much for your questions. I do need to let these gentlemen off the stage. So I want to thank all of you for your insight and your wisdom. Thank all of you for coming. And Liana, I'll toss it back to you to wrap it up for tonight.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, dear guests, esteemed panelists, for being with us tonight. Truly inspiring conversation and a panel, and we're so grateful. So for tonight, there's more food. Chef Isam, who I want to thank, actually is on his second venture. He has opened a second restaurant in Los Gatos that is called DAR, D-A-R, Mediterranean food. If you haven't been there, please visit. So he's catering to us today. He is also a dear friend. And Josh and Tanya here are crafting cocktails. So in a mingle and network and enjoy the atmosphere. We appreciate you all so very much. And thank you, Mary Jo, Sarah, Lisa. We truly love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you guys run a top-notch event. This is awesome. I have not been to the showroom. I'm embarrassed to say, although I have spec'd your products and worked with, a lot of these systems in many of our projects. But, so a little bit challenging because I wanted to look at everything in the showroom and I wanted to interact with all the wonderful guests. But this is fun. This is super fun. And you guys just really... you run a first-class event.
I've talked to a number of the attendees, and I'm very impressed with the diversity of the folks that have come here tonight to listen to the program and hear what we've got to say.
It was a very enlightening experience for me. Number one, TBS Design Studio is a phenomenal host. It was great to be able to come here and do this. It was a very nice meeting and working with all the people here.
Very pleasantly surprised to see the space and the production value and everything you guys have done. Really thankful.